Well, let's get to our final topic today, which is Penn State recruiting news from this past weekend. We'll start with the bad stuff because it is the most newsy of the news, and it is that Maxwell Hiller released his top 4. Penn State was not in it. You'll notice Alabama, Tennessee, Ohio State, and Florida. Makes a lot of sense with Phil Troutwine down there. How do you read this situation beyond Penn State not being in it? Like, is there they'll continue to chip away and like they have an opportunity? Like, what is this development saying about the situation beyond just that he made these top 4 schools? Is it dead?
Yeah, I think you look at that top 4, and first off, his top 3 last summer was Penn State, South Carolina, and Clemson. So, like, he's done some changing in terms of his thought process. I think this is one of those things where the gap that we, sat there and twiddled our thumbs for 50 days or whatever, while nothing happened on the recruiting front, I think that hurt. I think before that, Penn State was trending down with him with the way that everything was going. He's so close to the situation. He heard the words. He heard the criticism and everything like that. It's been, not great for the last 6 or so months with Max Hiller. Now they got him up to campus for a visit earlier. I guess it was in January, and really tried to spin that one around and didn't quite come to play. So now that top 5, Alabama, Florida, Tennessee, and Ohio State, those sting for multiple reasons for Penn State fans. Of course, Ohio State, you never want to see Ohio State on the list for a Pennsylvania kid. And Florida, I think Florida's trending here. I think Florida and Phil Troutwine and the ability to still go south, because this is a guy that was always looking to go south, even though I think he was open to Penn State very much so in the early outset, but he's always had an eye out there and said, what if I could go there, which is why South Carolina and Clemson were in there. I think Florida is a good confluence for him to get the relationships that he desires with Phil Troutwine and the weather that he desires as well. So tough one for Penn State here. They'll keep chipping away. I think I said it a couple of weeks ago. I did not expect Maxwell Hiller to end up at Penn State. It would take a lot to turn that one. And he's apparently further along than we thought he would be. He's got a couple of official visits in the works, not to Penn State. If you're looking at these early losses, Hiller, Keemon Spell, I think Spell would be more likely to come back around than Hiller, but you try to make it work. Now, I think the interesting thing here is you're looking at sort of the fallout of all that stuff back in the fall, but on top of that, you're bringing in Matt Campbell, not a ton of connections to these guys on the East Coast, and there's going to have to be some working through that. And I still think the new coach bump will exist. It's not coming right now. It's not coming right now, but I still think it will absolutely take place. But they have a lot of ground to make up in terms of forging relationships with these guys. You bring in a guy that has some sort of loose connection, or at least has recruited the area or something like that. Okay, that can get running a little bit quicker. But in Eastern Pennsylvania, which is different than Western Pennsylvania in several ways, that is a tougher sledding. So you're looking at Eastern Pennsylvania, you're looking at DMV, you're looking at North Jersey, up into New England as spots that are in dire need of forging relationships, and they can do it, and it's a long process, and not everything has to be done on February 10th, but at the same time, it's going to be a process where they have to get out there and they have to continue to endear themselves and be the Penn State that these guys knew, but also forge those relationships and be the program that these guys want to play for.
How much of that 50-day coaching search process and all of the negative recruiting and all the void do you think is it counteracting any sort of like new coach bump excitement you might have gotten early in the process from Matt Campbell and a new staff? Because I'm just, the way that you phrase that of how negative the situation was for recruits for so long, I mean, it's obvious. It is very clear that that's a reasonable thing to point to. So is that something that you think is part of this conversation, or is it just going to be, as you said, it's going to come at some point, and it's just that we're in February, which is a dead period, and some of these guys have long existing relationships, like Phil Troutwine at Florida now.
Yeah, Phil Troutwine in Florida, James Franklin at Virginia Tech is going to talk to these guys and tell them Penn State's not the place that they think it is, or they thought it was when they were selling Penn State. Like that, all this stuff is recruiting, and it's all part of how you dig yourself out of the hole. And yes, they're in a deeper hole than they should have been, based on the way that the coaching search went, the way that everything went, the way that the last time these guys were on campus, a lot of them for the big time ones were at the end of September, and vibes were really good until they weren't. And then they got really bad, and they see that. They understand the headlines. They understand the chatter from the people around them. Coatesville's not very far from State College, and it was downright toxic. And I think that that's sort of something that you can rub off on prospects, it can rub off on coaches, it can rub off on everybody. And that's a tough thing to deal with if you're a new staff that's coming in. Hey, I mean, his hands can be up and say no harm, no foul, but I think he understands the situation, Matt Campbell. I mean, the situation of rebuilding the infrastructure that was there for so long. And it's a tough storm of coming off of 12 years of what you thought everything was, and the infrastructure that was built here, and the feeling good about everything that was in place. With Keemon Spell was committed, Khalil Taylor was committed, Leighton Von Brandt was committed, all over the place. You've got all this stuff that you had in place, and then all of a sudden it goes away, and that's giving kids and coaches and trainers and everybody license to look away and say, okay, well, what are my other options? And some of these kids have really, really good options, like Maxwell Hiller. I think he's the best offensive lineman in the state. I thought last year was him and Kevin Brown were awesome prospects. Penn State would love to have Maxwell Hiller. No doubt about it. This is not a situation where they didn't put the effort in, just the interest wasn't there. And that's something that they're going to have to get around with some of these top kids. And at the end of the day, Penn State, this new staff, this new approach is going to be on the outside looking in for a lot of these top kids.
Yeah. The good news, I think, for Penn State football fans, and this is kind of what we started the show and what a lot of it was about, is I think Ryan Clanton is a good offensive line coach from what I've seen of his production at Iowa State. And now he's got the talent left over from what Phil Troutwine had built here. So you can rebuild these things of perception pretty quickly with some good on-field results. And the second thing is, you mentioned infrastructure twice there, and I think that's a very great word to use. There is the hard infrastructure. We've been talking about it for how long here, and Nate not being on the show, I think, is perfect for this conversation, because the actual infrastructure of buildings, stadium, all those things that James Franklin helped build here at Penn State, that stays. The recruiting infrastructure, as you pointed out, what he built in terms of the staff and the relationships and the connections, all those things, you have to build that side as well. And the good news, I'd say, Fitz, for Penn State football fans is it's a lot cheaper to build that infrastructure because it takes phone calls and plane rides. It doesn't take putting steel and concrete in the ground, so they can build this up. As you mentioned, a new coach bump can come in the future, and it doesn't require a stimulus package from Penn State to be passed so that they can put a new building up. And I know I've already lost half of the people that don't want to give James Franklin credit for anything, but here's the thing: is like he did all those things, and now he's gone and doesn't get to use them anymore. Matt Campbell will see if he can make better use of those tools and can do the same thing on the recruiting front.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting watch, because I don't think it's going to come as fast as people want it to. Because again, February 10th, it doesn't have to be done right now. It's not done right now, and we're going to see a process play out in the way that these processes play out. Like this is not an alien situation by any stretch of the imagination. But you're finding yourself in a spot where it's going to. We want it now, right? We want the girl from Willy Wonka. We want it. We want it now. Everything. Yep. We had this conversation. Remember, we had this conversation a month ago about the portal that was a couple days old at this point. And it was like, why isn't everything happening right now? Sometimes it takes patience. And that's where you're at right now with Penn State recruiting. Beyond that, reoffered Brandon Lockley. I think Penn State is trying to get back into it. It kind of went a little bit fast and loose there for a little bit, but I think they've done a nice job in circling back around and making him feel like a priority with the new staff. And this is a whole college football thing. You're going to find find players, specifically in-state players, that either find themselves wanting to be, I don't want to say wanting to be catered to, because that's different, but needing a greater sense of attention. And if they don't get that attention, they feel like
enthusiasm. They want their enthusiasm reciprocated, because they've excited and they want.
Well, no, it's not even that. It's more like, okay, you're here, you're in my yard now. Pay attention to me, and that's great. Like I think that's actually probably the right attitude to have if you're an in-state prospect that's in demand. And some guys aren't getting that attention, and they've gone elsewhere, and they've handled it differently. I think Penn State did a nice job in terms of Brandon Lockley of establishing that maybe the comments and the connection that they had on one end did not feel the same as they thought it felt. And now it's like, okay, well, I got to maybe put a little bit more effort into here. So maybe it's a good wake-up call for Penn State in terms of recruiting the in-state guys, recruiting some of those hotbeds like St. Joe's Prep, and I think they'll be fine in that nature.